Gabi Lewis, after graduating from Brown University less than a year ago, he's already transforming how we think about the future of protein. He founded EXO, a company whose mission is to normalize the consumption of insects as a sustainable food source, and has been interviewed by media outlets including the New York Times, National Geographic, and the Wall Street Journal. Let's give him a big round of applause, everybody.
Good afternoon. I'd like to start by taking a quick poll. How many of you here eat shellfish on a regular basis? Okay. And how many of you eat insects on a regular basis? 1, 2, right there. 3. So I think it's perhaps the most ridiculous thing in the world that these two arthropods, shrimp and crickets, one of them we think is a delicacy. It's delicious, we consume it frequently. The other one, crickets, we think it's disgusting, unfit for consumption in this country, and we never eat it. We don't think it's food. So during the next 20 minutes, I hope to convince you that whoever you are, wherever you live, whatever your goals might be, eating insects simply makes sense. That's going to be the easy part. Assuming I can convince you that eating insects makes rational sense, I'm then going to spend some time exploring how we can actually convince Americans to eat insects and get over that psychological hump. I also want to say I'm by no means arguing we should only eat insects and stop eating grass-fed steaks or whatever else we enjoy. I'm simply arguing that insects deserve to be viewed as one viable option. So to start with, it's worth noting that while this concept of consuming insects is foreign to many of us, it's actually nothing new. In fact, quite the opposite is true. Insects aren't just paleo, they're pre-paleo. And there's a tremendous amount of evidence that our earliest ancestors were eating insects even before they learned to hunt or farm. This evidence includes things like fossilized feces in the US and Mexico, which were found to contain insects ranging from beetles to mites to ants, cave paintings in Spain depicting the consumption of wild bees, ruins in China where they found these large cocoons of wild silkworms with holes in them suggesting that the pupae had been eaten, and much, much more. You combine evidence like that with the fact that every single primate around today eats insects in various degrees, and you realize that eating insects is about as paleo as it gets. But it doesn't stop there. We can fast forward a couple of million years to ancient Greece, and Aristotle's brain food of choice wasn't the fish oil capsules we consume today, but a far more primal equivalent of juicy cicadas, which were packed full of omega-3s. And even today, 80% of the world's countries eat almost 2,000 species of edible insects, ranging from casu marzu in Italy, to jingleed in Thailand, to escamoles in Mexico. So you can see that we, as a species, have this enormous legacy of eating bugs, both globally and historically. And if we really want to be following a paleo diet, we should be eating lots and lots of bugs. So all of this begs the rather obvious question, why? Why have we been eating insects for so long? And why do so many of us still do it? Well, at the risk of employing a term that's lost almost all meaning, insects are a true superfood. And their nutritional density is basically unparalleled. To borrow a metaphor from the writer Daniela Martin, we can think of food in terms of currency, where the dollar value is the nutritional payoff. So we'd have plants represented by dollar bills, fruits maybe 5s, nuts $10 bills, insects and other animals, they'd be crisp $20 bills, maybe even 50s. So insects are exceptionally high in protein, in some cases up to 91% by dry weight. They're not only high in protein quantity, but also protein quality, and they contain all the essential amino acids. They're high in healthy fats, particularly omega-3s, and they're really high in micronutrients, like B vitamins, beta-carotene, and vitamin E. Dried crickets, for example, contain twice the iron as beef gram for gram, and more calcium than milk, gram for gram. So if we can consider insects purely from the perspective of the individual, which granted might be hard for some of us given the psychological leap, but if we can consider insects purely as a source of nutrition, then eating them is an absolute no-brainer. A bug is a nutritional powerhouse. Now, if that's not enough to convince you, then a further argument in favor of eating insects relates to their relative environmental impact. So the negative environmental impact of industrialized livestock is fairly well documented. It accounts for maybe 18% of all greenhouse gases. It's more than the entire transportation sector combined, planes, trains, and cars. Insects, however, are a fantastic alternative for a number of reasons. Firstly, they produce almost zero methane. So it's estimated that a cricket, or the same weight of crickets, produces 80 times less methane than cattle. Additionally, insects are poikilothermic. That basically means they match their internal body temperatures with the external environment. And as a result, they exert less energy maintaining their body temperatures than their warm-blooded counterparts like cows, pigs, and sheep. Less energy means they need less feeds and less water. A standard metric to measure efficiency here is the feed conversion ratio, which is exactly what it sounds like. It measures an animal's efficiency at converting dry feeds to desired outputs, in this case, edible protein. The feed conversion ratio of crickets is approximately 1.1 to 1. And that's twice as efficient as chickens, 4 times as efficient as pigs, and almost 6 times as efficient as cattle. It also takes a fraction of the almost 3,000 liters required to create 150 grams of beef protein to produce a similar amount of insect protein. Finally, insects also reproduce frighteningly quickly. A single female cricket can lay up to 1,500 eggs in less than 4 weeks. So you combine all of these various environmental benefits, less feeds, less water, less space, faster reproduction, zero methane, and you get this overarching statistic which comes from the UN that it's 20 times more efficient to raise insects for protein than cattle. Okay, so we've hopefully established that insects are good for you, they're truly paleo, and they're good for the environment. They're basically an animal quality protein without the environmental drawbacks. Now for the hard part. How do you actually get past that very real psychological aversion that most people here feel when we contemplate eating bugs? It's one thing discussing the rational arguments in favor of entomophagy. It's another thing entirely to actually get people to act on that rationality and get over the psychological leap. Thankfully, we're not alone here. And there's a long list of foods that were once viewed as disgusting and now viewed as normal or even cool and aspirational. Coconut water, kimchi, kombucha, other fermented foods. Lobster is a particularly interesting example. So it's currently illegal to serve lobster to prisoners in Maine more than twice a week. It's because during the colonial era, prisoners rebelled when they were fed lobster too frequently. So even though now it's the epitome of decadence, there was a time when lobster was considered street food. It was vermin of the sea, suitable only for prisoners and servants. Organ meats is another one. Brains, livers, hearts. And this audience in the paleo movement was at the forefront of the movement to embrace organ meats because we recognized the nutritional benefits while everyone else was still being squeamish. Greek yogurts. Sushi is another interesting example. Let's take one more poll. How many of you eat sushi on a regular basis? Most of you. Okay. So if this was 20 years ago, you'd be pioneers. Until relatively recently, everyone in the US and much of Europe thought raw fish was absolutely disgusting. Then in the 60s, an enterprising chef in LA comes along and he creates the California roll. So he takes the raw fish, he gets rid of the fatty tuna, he replaces it with avocado, he turns it inside out, and he creates the California roll, which is basically sushi reimagined for Western palates. and then it spread from Hollywood onto the rest of the US, and then to Europe. Now there's a sushi bar in most cities in the US, and most of us will happily devour a plate of sashimi, but that wasn't always the case. So you see there's this long list of foods which have made the very same transition that we're trying to bring about with insects. So I think there's a couple of main lessons we can draw from these historical case studies. The first is that these trends tend to happen in a top-down fashion. So you need the right tastemakers to trumpet the cause and convince others to do the same. This is already happening somewhat organically through a couple of different channels to insects. The first is in the fine dining world, and some of the best restaurants in the world regularly feature insects in their menu. Noma in Copenhagen frequently ranks the #1 restaurant in the world, often serves insects, and regularly serves a cricket soy sauce to its diners. In fact, Nordic Food Lab, which is Noma's experimental arm, recently received a 3.6 million kroner grant to explore insect cuisine and make it more delicious. International agencies are also getting involved. Last May, the UN released a 200-page report arguing that we've got to start eating insects for the environmental and nutritional reasons that I discussed previously. And the EU has committed several million euros to figuring out how we can make insect protein more commercially available. The second lesson is that you need to create some kind of introductory vehicle for bringing these foods into the mainstream. You need a California roll before you can even contemplate the sashimi. So how would we go about creating a California roll of insect cuisine? Well, it mustn't look like insects, right? So nothing, no legs, no antenna, nothing whatsoever to remind us what we're eating and then trigger that disgust reflex that many of us feel, even if it's irrational. Secondly, it's going to be as close as possible to something that we already eat. So we want to narrow that psychological leap to a really small jump. One such solution, which is what I'm pursuing through my own company, Exo, is insect flours. In particular, we're using cricket flour and combining it into protein bars. It's essentially dehydrated and finely ground crickets, which then you can use in anything from bars to shakes to baked goods. And it combines all of the environmental and nutritional benefits of eating bugs, but it removes the psychological barrier, or at least 99% of the psychological barrier. So that's the only real way I see us getting past the psychological hump. It's by basically hiding the insects in something delicious that we already consume. And you know how I know it's working? The ridiculous amount of hate mail we get each and every single day. So you know you're onto something when the internet trolls come after you. So before I open to Q&A, I wanted to share one email we got last week. This certainly takes the prize for wait, ta-da, intentional stupidity. Congratulations, cricket bar dudes. You are so misinformed that you suck big. You guys are shameless charlatans, snake oil peddlers. I'm sure you don't know the meaning of it. Look it up. We get that each and every day, and it inspires us to keep on going and champion this cause and try and normalize insect protein. So thank you very much, and I'd like to open it up to Q&A.